Really appreciate being here, Chris. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. It's good to see you all tonight. Thanks for coming. So, yeah, we're going to explore this question of what does it mean to help all people find nature where they live, work, and play. And there's a lot wrapped up in that to me. And so we're just going to get started with a little greeting with each other, and then a little activity where you see where the post-it notes come in. So this quote is one that I really am attracted to. It's it says, "I believe the best way to begin reconnecting humanity's heart, mind, and soul to nature is for us to share our individual stories." And this is from a gentleman who's an ecologist at Clemson University, Dr. Drew Lanham. He wrote this book, The Home Place, Mount Mars and Our College Man's Love Affair with Nature. And so I wanted to use that to open up with just some discussion, right? So if you've got 2 to 3 people near you that you can talk to, move the chairs if you want to, because I want this to take a few minutes. And what I'd like you to do is to tell each other a story about a time where you found nature. And now I'll give you a second. We're not going to do it just yet. I'll give you a second to think while I introduce myself a little bit. All right? If you're thinking about a story of a time you found nature, right? So my name is Chris Whitmire. I think first and foremost, I'm a Rochesterian. I've lived here most of my life. I kept trying to leave, and I kept coming back. I absolutely love it here, and I'm happy to live here. I'm also an educator. I was a teacher in the Rochester City School District for about 13 years, and also teach anything and everywhere I possibly can. It was one of those things I was trying not to do other things, and I just got being attracted to education. And so I went with it. Up until about 4 years ago, left my job as a teacher and went back to school at IIT and got an MS in business management so that I could launch the Rochester Ecology Partners. And I'll talk a little bit more about our organization. But that's me, and my wife Tiffany and I, and our dog Emmett, that's my family. So you'll see Emmett again. So now I'm going to go back to this. So I'd like you to just take a few minutes to share with 2 to 3 people, and again, it's it'll be a better exercise if you can find more than one person to talk to, turn and talk, and find more to circle. And just tell some stories about the time you found nature. And I'm just going to leave it that simple, and then we'll get to the next piece. But I'll give you some time to talk to each other, figure out who you want to talk to. It's okay if you just have a partner. So we can keep writing, but I'm just curious if there's anybody that feels willing to share what emerged for them as a theme or an idea or even one or two words. Yeah.
Sure. It seems like everyone sort of has experiences hiking in nature with family members or people who they care about.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. I like that as a social activity, as a connection. Yeah.
I would call express that you get an interest in nature at an early age when you're children.
Okay, an early age interest in nature, absolutely. All right. Anyone else? Yeah.
Boy Scouts, 1950s, being required to memorize and identify trees and plants in some really rough places in western New York.
I can connect to the Boy Scout piece as well, but that's also the tasks of it too. So thank you. Yeah.
Little story that I heard, a very nice picture of a misty thread morning of the Appalachian Trail of the
Okay, excellent. Thank you for sharing that about being on the Appalachian Trail on a misty morning and seeing a porcupine. And so thank you. Yes.
I also taught in city school, and I took my class outside around the perimeter and looked for bugs and weeds, and I brought them in and identified them.
Awesome. Awesome. So just took them out into the schoolyard. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Well, I go back when I was about 6 years old and took walks with my mom in the Catskills and some of the woodlots. She would point out the names of different trees and shrubs and berries and insects that we saw or heard. And she knew their names in English, which I thought I realized that was really remarkable, being that she was born in Ukraine and Russian was her primary language. And she learned with their names in English as well.
And that theme of learning names too, and what things are around. I also want to come back to that in a little bit too. So thank you for sharing that. All right. Anyone else? Yes. Scouting. Yeah, excellent, right? The influence of scouting and other sort of organized activities. And I could talk all night about that, but I'm going to keep moving here a little bit. So I did a little bit about me. So now I'd like to just talk about the Rochester Ecology Partners. And the card that the Post-it note is attached to is just a little quick card about our organization. And I'll collect those Post-it notes by the end of the night. And if you want to keep the card, you can. If you want to turn the card into me. But we landed on this mission statement of helping all people find nature where they live, work, and play. And we're a relatively new organization, 2 years, so we're still really trying to figure out exactly what that means. But wanted to start today with that idea of finding nature. Like, what does it mean to find nature? And now I want to kind of go into that idea of all people and have us think and consider some of these things about that all people. And also that live, work, and play. So what does that actually mean? You know, school, I've been thinking a lot about school as a learning organization. I'm like, but we didn't include learn in our mission statement, even though we do a lot of learning. But I think it's an important distinction because, you know, we live, work, and play, and we're always learning. We should always be learning, no matter what we're doing, whether we're living, working, or playing, right? And then the other thing is that for me, this idea of nature is a much broader idea than just kind of the bugs and animals and plants, right? So it's our environment and what we know about it. And again, knowing the names, knowing the connections between things, knowing what's in our environment is an important thing. But then it's also that relationship. So it's not just a noun, it's not a nature isn't a thing, but it's also there's relationship and there's verb, there's action that's embedded in that word to us. And then that integrated way of thinking and being. And so, you know, it's not just one thing, but it's really that you're seeing the connections between things and that you're really putting all of the pieces together to live this life and do the work that we're doing in our world and play in this world, right? So there's a little nature break for us. Anybody know where that is? +5. Wednesday points if you know where that is. It's a good guess. It's RIT, actually. It's tucked into the parking lots of RIT. So I use that one because it's a good example. And so I'm going to talk actually after 5 minutes. All right. No. So starting with why do we need an organization like this? And in going to RIT, it gave me some time to really think about this piece of, you know, why do we need an organization that is for helping all people find nature? Somebody sent me an email like, wow, it's crazy we would need an organization like that. It's everywhere. But it's really important because there's this new word people are using, eco-anxiety, and just that worry about what's going on in the world around us when it comes to not only climate change, but biodiversity loss, air pollution, water pollution, all these things that are just in our minds and spirits all the time now. And so people need some sort of relief in a lot of different ways and exacerbated it, right? But people are disconnected from each other. Richard Louv has this idea of the nature deficit disorder. And so the nature deficit disorder is that people don't have enough nature in their lives. Then this path to success is unclear for us. So success being young people that are in school and in education, thinking about the future, where their future is going to be, but even us as a civilization, as a society right now, what is the path to the next generation living a happy, healthy life? And that is really unclear to us. And then I just put that, like, if you looked around, right? If you're asking why we need an organization that helps people find nature, it's really easy to find all of these examples. So we have this organization based on these two core ideas and the idea of feedback loops in this, that experiential learning that's nature-based, all right, leads to stronger communities, and nature-based community building, getting people outside in community or connected to nature, doesn't even have to be outside, will lead to learning experiences that generate some of that emotion and that true experience and connectedness that real education does. All right? And then I've just got some buzzwords in there of innovative approaches, right? But to me, there's the one thing there that it's about co-creating a hopeful future. And so that's when we think of nature, ecosystems work in collaboration with each other. The mushrooms are helping the trees to live and communicate with each other, and it happens together, right? It's oftentimes we think way too much about competition in nature. We really need to think about that cooperation and how things come together to create what we see in nature, right? And so our organization serves members of the greater Rochester community. We really focus on youth and families, young adults, and then really though trying to engage anybody that's seeking opportunities to improve individual, community, and environmental health and wellness. So that's a little bit about the Rochester Ecology Partners and what I'm doing here. Now I'm going to actually move, I'll come back to these. I'm looking at it. So, all right, I'll come back to that. So I want to get to this of how do we help all people find nature where they live, work, and play. I came up with 3 themes that I wanted us to talk about tonight and consider. So the first one is around mindset. Now, I'm big on mindset. So I started with this question of, is there a place in the forest for people who want to listen to music? And I'll give you a second to think about that. If you want to talk to people next to you, you can. But this isn't the deep question I'm hoping you'll consider. But give me a second to think about that, but I'll make sure I get it. Okay, so you had a second to consider this. Now, I want you to take a second, and when you thought about that question, I want you to think about which one of these scenarios were you thinking? Were you thinking of the person playing the radio at the park, in the woods, in the forest, while you're trying to hike and enjoy your time out in the wilderness? Or were you thinking about Orchestra of the Pines at the Cumming Nature Center? And were you thinking about enjoying live music somewhere in the forest and the kind of music you like to listen to, right? And so I just wanted to use this as an illustration of how mindset affects the way that we think about things and who gets to enjoy nature and how they get to enjoy nature. And how much of that is actually constructed in our heads. And I think it's a really important thing to think about the fact that what we think of as norms for the forest are just that. They're norms. They're cultural norms that have been decided by a group of people, which is the way that society and cultures work. A group of people decide on these norms. But it all represents a mindset. And the way that we think about things is represented by our mindset, right? So I want you to take a minute to think about this and talk with the people that you were talking to earlier. I want you to think about this question, right? How do we find a place in the forest for people who want to listen to to music. So I want you to just talk to the person next to you or who you were talking to. I want you to think about this, right? And if it's like, oh, concerts in the woods, that sounds awesome. Or is there a way that there could be a discussion about it or something like that? So I want you to have conversations over it. So if you Google nature, this is what's going to come up, right? And I think it's really interesting. You know, these are what we think about being connected to nature. Going camping, sitting around a campfire, going and cleaning up the park, going out for a hike alone or a small group of people, planting something, planting a tree, right? And so oftentimes people kind of wring their hands and go, why don't people want to be connected to nature? Why don't, you know, certain groups of people want to be involved in these sorts of activities? But I think it's really important to step back and try to ask this question of how do we create structures that get people connected to nature? And so how do we really think about what we're trying to do? You know, we've got the picture up there. Those are some young people in a LEAP program up in Washington Grove this summer. And that was part of a summer program that was engaged in youth and enrichment for the summer. Thinking about how we get to nature. So this summer we spent Fridays taking the city bus to different parks. And it takes a long time, but it also has this feeling of adventure. And it only costs $1 a person versus the $450 we spent to get a bus out to Cummings Nature Center. There's room for both, but really thinking about that. And then also this picture here is from the Nature-Based Learning Symposium we had for educators, where we got everybody outside. We said, you want to get some professional learning in before the school year starts. You want a chance to think about how you're going to make your classroom great this year. And so we want to get you outside to do that and create a structure that engages you in nature while you're thinking about it, right? And so I wanted to also highlight in these structures that oftentimes things are pitted against each other, right? So you're either working on getting people out to the wilderness or nearby nature in their schoolyard, right? That you're doing one or the other, and that, you know, if you're trying to keep them near the schoolyard, then they're missing out on something. But if you're trying to get them out in the wilderness, then you're teaching them that what they have near them is important, right? Active pursuits versus just chilling. I've been thinking a lot about that as we're like organizing events for our organization. So much of what people think about getting outside is going for a hike, something that's very active, or going for a run. I've been thinking about fundraising, and like the idea of 5K fundraisers is just like, wow. They're like run and run and run, right? And so why does it, you know, there's also opportunities for just chill. Read a book under a tree day is also finding nature, right? And that's a shift in the structure of how things are thought of finding nature, right? Meeting people where they are and getting them out of their comfort zone. I'm big on that too. Not everybody is going to want to go out in the middle of the woods. And even some of you might have tried to take people out to the Adirondacks and have never had any experiences like that. And it just doesn't work for you, right? So there's some meeting people where they are. That's another option of it. Empower and support people. Find easy access and remove the barriers, right? Diversity and unity are also things that are not necessarily in opposition to each other. That you can have a group of people with different ideas, but you can also be unified around a common goal, right? And then the idea of work and play. I kind of picked that up from Rue Mapp, who started out the Afro. And she said something that just has always stuck with me of like, the first time you take young people out into the woods or out into the park, don't make them clean up trash. Give them an opportunity for joy. Give them an opportunity for discovery. Give them an opportunity for inquiry. Really give them the opportunity to just be there and not tell them that if you want to come out here, you're going to have to work. Give them the chance to play, and then the work will come later. And to me, that was a really big thing about structure. The theme there is how you structure the experience determines the outcomes of the experience for everyone. So I'm going to give you another minute here where I want you to choose one of the bullets, and just with a pair, or if you like the group you've been talking about, right? I just want you to share with the person next to you one of the bullet points that connects to you and why, even if you're like trying to sort out why I put those two together or something, or what that has to do with the structure. Wait, take a few minutes. I want you to share with the person next to you. And so I just want to get back to this idea of structure, where it's oftentimes people ask the wrong questions. You know, why don't people want to be involved? Rather than these questions of, you know, who do we want to include? And that comes with it of who's going to be excluded. And that can be okay. If you want to include people who like to hike, you're automatically excluding people who don't like to hike. That's okay if you're leading a hike. But if you're thinking about, well, we want to include people that live in rural areas and people that live in city areas together, then you need to think about the structure that's going to create that situation and that experience, right? And that other part is how will they know, how will you know if they are included, right? So how are you going to tell whether or not the people you were hoping to include are actually included in what you're doing? And then what do you need to do to make sure they are included? So that's things like transportation. That's things like what's the cost of the activity going to be. And I'll always say that the best way to answer these questions are to talk to the people that you're trying to include, right? To make sure that they're part of the conversation. That you don't want to guess. You just want to, it's when the ADK membership gets together and they're like, how are we going to figure out what we're going to do? You talk to each other, right? You don't go talk to people that work for the Y and say, what should we do for the ADK? And then you just talk to the ADK, right? It's the same thing with this when it comes to inclusion. All right. So I wanted to end on this, and I think I'm doing pretty well on time. So, you know, the stories are the third part of this that I think are a really important thing to talk about. Bring it back to the beginning, right? So why do we need to find nature? And then why is nature accessible to some people and not others? And this can also be in the context of where we live, where we work, and where we play. As I was working inside today, I was thinking about all the people that work inside, and it's hard for them to have access to nature where they work. And so really thinking about that's kind of interesting because that actually often leads you to people with privilege. And like, why are so many people with privilege working inside all day long? And you know, what's the story behind that? And so I think this is important because oftentimes the stories that we tell need to be rethought a little bit. And this here, I don't know if you recognize that jacket. Yes, right? It's taken from Jack's doctor this summer. And I have had lots of experiences swimming in the lake, in lakes, like the Cranberry Lake, going to Massanutten and swimming in Massanutten Lake, swimming in the Thousand Islands with my family's cottage. And it all started with my mom taking us to swim lessons at Marshall High School for free in the summertime. And we would do that every day. And that's how I got to be a swimmer. Is that my mom said, you're going to be a swimmer. She didn't know how to swim. She said, you're going to be a swimmer. Started at Marshall, then started Y swim team, Wilson swim team, and I love swimming. And to me, the reason that it's good to know how to swim is I could care who I could beat in a race. But the fact that I can swim in that lake happily and safely is awesome. And that's part of my story. So then there are groups of people, though, whose story doesn't include all of that. And I took this picture this summer. That's at Genesee Dale Park, Rochester's only outdoor public pool. And it was closed for construction delays and things like that. But then a lot of the pools were closed this summer because of lifeguard shortages. And there are a lot of pools that have been closed in the city because of lots of factors. And the pools that are open are 80 years old. They were built in the 30s, 90 years. So the story is not that people don't want to swim. There are certain groups of people who don't want to swim. It's that access is denied. And so really thinking about that as you're trying to, okay, how do we get kids up to the Adirondacks to swim in the lake? You have to go all the way back to how do we get them to swim? How do we get them comfortable in boats? Then how do we get them up to the Adirondacks to swim? And so you have to think of the whole story of why they're not prepared or why they're not in a place where they're comfortable swimming in the lake, right? The other one for me is also this story that's often told about young people. You know, I work mainly with young people in the city, but I think the story is told all over the place that young people don't like to get outside. They want to be on their electronics. They just want to sit at home. And I have not found that at all. And anytime I've given young people an opportunity to get outside and explore, most 80%, you know, there's always the 10% that are just like, I just hate this. You're like, fucking get hate. But most people, the story is that they get outside, they explore, they have a good time, they're giving them a chance to find that joy. And they love it. And so those are the kinds of stories that we need to be telling when we think about what can be happening. And I think, again, also, that some of it is also the story of the outdoors as a solitary pursuit. That's why I kind of caught on when we were talking about being out with your family and things. And scouts for me, that was a social experience. And so when we think about the story of going outside, we need to shift it a little bit so that it's more accessible to people that like to be in groups. Because oftentimes, there's a lot of good reasons for people to want to be in groups. And the narrative is often that you go outside to be by yourself, that you go outside to be quiet. And so that excludes people from finding nature. Where if we can tell a new story, and this was from a first day hike we had. 80 people showed up for that. I thought I would like it with like 10. 80 people showed up, and I was like, this is going to be fun. And it actually was a lot of fun. It was awesome. And it was a huge success to me that there were that many people in the community outside. And then those are some young men that my wife teaches who are from Eritrea and Somalia. And there we are in February walking around outside. And they were loving it, right? Got it. All right. I got 1 minute left. So for me, these are the themes of the stories that I like to tell, right? Our stories of abundance. There's nature everywhere. And we just have to find it. There's more nature in some places than others, but there's nature everywhere. We can cultivate it and we can grow, right? Diversity is strength. We find people that are different. We find different experiences for ourselves. It gives us strength. It gives us resilience in the world. And then connection. Any story about connection helps us to find nature. And then I am always one-on-one, right? We're not talking about deficit. We're not talking about any of the other things that are negative. We want to bring those up. But we want to make sure that hope is the main thing that we're telling the stories. All right, so I'm just going to end with this. These are some resources that I feel like, okay, I want to continue to explore these things. These are 4 things here. This article right here, 5 Ways to Make the Outdoors More Inclusive, is an incredible article about how to make the outdoors more inclusive. The Home Place, that was the quote of Drew Lanham, is a good, that book is a great window into the life and the thinking of somebody who's trying to find nature as a black man. And then Upgrading Sweetgrass by Robert Wall Kemper is another one that I think is just huge for about how do we all find nature and that spirituality more than the intellectual exercise. But she does a great job of weaving all that together, intellectual and spiritual. And then the Children in Nature Network has all kinds of things about this and a huge resource library for it. And then I'm just going to end like this. If you got the little card, I didn't talk as much as I thought I would about organization, but if whatever you heard here makes you want to get more involved, these are 4 ways that you can get involved. Donations. We're a new organization looking for seed money that's going to help fund our programs and fuel our organization. You can look on the back of the card, this is all on there too. Ways to donate. Volunteer if you want to help us out with leadership positions or even just with events. And then participate and collaborate on whatever ways that you feel like you might be able to work with us. Partners is in our name on purpose. And then we're having an event October 1st and invite all of you to come. It's going to be a campfire night in the middle of the city. We're going to find some nature and a good time. And thank you very much for your attention today. I hope you feel like this is good.